Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, Working with MindManager and SharePoint. My name is Rainer Oberser and I will talk today about the interfaces between MindManager and SharePoint and how to make the most out of it. Talk about working with MindManager, concrete MindManager 2018 Enterprise and SharePoint. And from the map you can see that I have split the matter in actually three sections. First section, we are talking about using SharePoint as a storage location for your map. This is one of the main purposes of SharePoint, replacing your file server infrastructure. So you are supposed and you want to store all the nice maps that you create in SharePoint and of course open them from SharePoint and work with SharePoint as a storage and sharing location. And we are talking about the options you have here in MindManager there. The next section is talking about how to create maps that help you to quickly navigate to specific SharePoint content that you need for the context you are working with your map with. So this is really about mapping out your content, making your content in SharePoint available in MindManager. SharePoint very nicely supports reaching very specific content via hyperlinks, and this is what I will talk about there. And then the last section is about a specific MindManager Enterprise functionality called the SharePoint Linker. You might be familiar with the Outlook linker that helps you to automatically bring in content from your Outlook. Well, the SharePoint linker in MindManager Enterprise does the same with content in SharePoint, and you can create some amazing things with this. So we are talking about this in detail as well. So let's get started with working with maps in SharePoint. And I mean, this is actually not very complicated. The official recommended and supported way to save your maps in SharePoint and open them from SharePoint is actually, since MindManager version 17, to add your SharePoint sites, the ones you are planning to store your maps in, as a so-called storage place or storage location in MindManager's file server. So I'm talking about the file menu here, open and save menu, and the add place function. So with previous versions you only could save your files locally. Locally also included network locations, and now we can add web-based or cloud locations. This add a place, and you can see this new feature not only supports SharePoint as a location or as a place, but also other cloud services like Microsoft OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox. But today it's mainly about SharePoint, and it's very simple and easy actually. You want to save your maps to a specific location in SharePoint, simply add the SharePoint site that contains that list you want to save in as a SharePoint location. Let me quickly open my browser and give you an example. Here I have like a SharePoint 2013 on-premise server and have opened a specific site. This site contains specific document libraries where I want to store my maps. So all I need is actually the URL to the site, not to the list, but to the site. And I get it out of the URL bar, address bar of my browser. So I simply copy this from here. Then I go back into MindManager, click on Add Places and add it. Now I've done it already, so I remove it and do it again. I click on Add and enter the site address URL. And important is the word site, not the list address, but the site address. So I paste what I have copied into here. And now let's have a closer look at what we pasted in there. MindManager is only expecting the site name, no SharePoint specifics. And even though I could click next and confirm this, I would always recommend to delete everything but the pure path portion of the URL pointing to your site. In our case, help desk is the end of my path. Underscore layouts is already SharePoint specific, so I get rid of this. Makes it easier to read afterwards, and then I click on next. Now SharePoint, as soon as I do this, MindManager tries to connect to this site, checking for the configured authentication mechanisms, do a first login, and if this all works nicely, you simply need to do this the first place you do this, and from there on everything works in the background. So I have added my on-premise SharePoint server, and you can see I've also added another SharePoint online server as here. And as soon as I've done it, I click on OK, and I can use those sites to open maps from. If I click on open and click on my server here, now you can see why I did not need to enter a list name, because now MindManager looks at the root of the site and shows me all the lists where it can save maps to. So these are document libraries, this one, this one, this one. You're also seeing internal libraries here, but you normally know the name of your library. So I double click on documents, and now I see all the maps that I've stored there and can simply open a map from there. I open it. And very importantly, please check after you have opened it the upper left corner of your map, because you must see this read-only sign here, meaning or showing you that MindManager has not actually opened a locally downloaded version of this file, but is showing you the actual file sitting on the SharePoint server. And this is always opened in read-only, or more precisely in checked-in mode. So it is not yet, it's checked in SharePoint, and therefore MindManager cannot edit it. In order to work with it, you need to check it out. And the good thing is you can do it right from here. You click here, click on checkout, and shortly after, this will change from gray to green, and now the file has been checked out to you. This is also visible to everyone else. Looking at the specific SharePoint location, you can edit it, and after you're done, you need to check it in again. So important to remember, MindManager requires check-in, check-out in order to edit or work with a map, even though SharePoint would allow to edit a file stored in a SharePoint library without checking it out, because it automatically sets a lock. MindManager does require and wants you to check the file out before you edit it. Actually, this read-only and checkout sign is always a very good indicator whether your SharePoint connectivity is okay, because whenever you think you have opened a map from SharePoint and don't see this read-only sign or this check-in, check-out overlay, here you know, or you can assume that you are not working with the file from SharePoint, but that you have opened a somehow downloaded file. So something downloaded the file locally, and then you opened this one. So please observe if you see this, and then you know that everything is okay. Let me close this. So yes, you need to see this, and add SharePoint locations, as many as you want is the recommended way to interact with SharePoint. Open maps to SharePoint, save maps to SharePoint, open maps from SharePoint. Now you see a WebDAV topic over here. I need to talk about this because I mean, we know that even though we have changed MindManager's file manager and made Places the preferred way to open with maps from SharePoint, a lot of our customers traditionally using WebDAV to interact with content from SharePoint, meaning that you will have a SharePoint location saved as a network location on the Windows File Explorer level, or that you have your SharePoints mapped in File Explorer as a network drive, or that you are starting from SharePoint and open a SharePoint library in File Explorer mode. This only works or is supported by the Internet Explorer browser, but I know that this is very popular. So this is how you, our customers, also work, and this is why we still support this way to open it. But please be careful. So let me open my File Explorer and show it. The site that we have just seen where I opened the map from has been mapped as a network drive here in my File Explorer. So I can now click on here, and this is showing me the folder structure of this site. In File Explorer, I again navigate to Shared Documents in here and see all my maps. And again, I can now from here open this by simply double-clicking it. You see the effect is the same again. Map is open in MindManager, and I see the read-only sign, meaning I am working with the map from the SharePoint location directly. Everything is all right, and again I can check it out, edit it, and check it in again. So one thing to remember here, File Explorer mode, is it's all pretty similar, but one important thing or one recommendation that I would give you, as soon as you have such map network drive, as you have your SharePoint included into your File Explorer, you could also reach these locations by the File Manager in MindManager through the local place, not a SharePoint place, but a local one. So you could go here, local. This opens, again, your File Explorer, and you could select this, but I would recommend not to do so. If you want to work with the WebDAV interface, my recommendation is do this outside of MindManager, because doing this, and if it works correctly or not, depends on so many parameters, like the Windows OS version you are working with and other sections. So we found that this might cause problems if you do it from within MindManager. So please do not go this way, but open your Internet Explorer independently and open your maps from here and upload your maps that you have saved locally into SharePoint, or save them or drag and drop them into those folders. Then you should be on the safe side. Also, there's one thing to remember. If you want to work with WebDAV, please make sure you check MindManager options, more specifically the open and save section within MindManager options. This one. So how do you get to MindManager options? You simply go to the file menu, into options, look for open and save, and here make sure you actually check this one, treat UNC path as a SharePoint server. So this is only necessary if you don't want to use places, added SharePoint places, but if you want to work like with your File Explorer. Also, while we are in this option dialog, observe this one, offline editing options for SharePoint server. So by default, this is the default setting. The server draft location is the location for offline maps, meaning as soon as you open a map from SharePoint via Places or via WebDAV, whenever you see this read-only and check-in, check-out thing, a map that you have checked out will be actually downloaded into a folder in your default files folder in Windows called SharePoint draft folder, and will sit there until you check it in. Meaning, if you do not check it in, as long as you do not check it in, you can work with this file from this folder, basically offline, and only check it in when you are connected again. So with this setting, server draft location, you can do offline editing and only check it in again, open it from this location, check it in when you have a SharePoint connection. Alternatively, you could say, I do not want to work offline, meaning you check it out, do your edits, check it in, and then you will never see any entry in the SharePoint draft folder within your My File directory. Okay, and I think that's pretty much all you need to know about opening and saving maps in SharePoint. I added a troubleshoot section here because, I mean, sometimes specifically, especially with SharePoint on-premise servers, we do have customers that have connectivity problems to their SharePoint. First of all, I mean, your SharePoint need to be set up to one of the supported authentication schemes. I mean, MindManager is pretty flexible and supports most of the established authentications in SharePoint, but with SharePoint on-premise, sometimes, I mean, it gets complicated. So if it doesn't work and you've tried out everything, please contact us and we try to further investigate with you. MindManager is a built-in logging feature that then can help us to find out what's the reason if this doesn't work. Before you contact support, please try to always empty your browser cache. So you enter a site to places and MindManager somehow doesn't connect to the site, gives you an error message. Please restart MindManager, and before you do a new trial, empty your browser cache. Then you start MindManager again and re-enter the site. This, more often than not, really helps to cure connectivity problems. Another important thing, check proxy settings in MindManager. Again, this is in MindManager options in the proxy settings sections. And prior to MindManager 18 Service Pack 2, you always need to enter a proxy manually in this section here, even though if your browsers do not need this. So in many cases, a proxy does exist in your environment, but is handled by a proxy configuration file, and only MindManager 18 Service Pack 2 can actually handle this proxy configuration file as far as SharePoint connectivity is concerned. So prior to Service Pack 2, MindManager 18 or MindManager 17, if you have a connectivity issue, please try to find out whether there is a proxy, and if there is a proxy, get the right information and enter the proxy path, the server name here, and eventually login credentials. And again, this in many cases the reason for connectivity problems. Okay, so let's move on from actually saving your maps in SharePoint, move on to the content in your map. And now I want to talk about maps that contain links to specific content locations in SharePoint. I mean, this is really not so SharePoint specific. I mean, but this is an important concept of working with MindManager. Just making smart use of hyperlinks, and in combination with SharePoint as a web-based environment, this works so nicely because other than your network drive where you can only link to files and folders, in SharePoint you can be much more specific in linking. You can link to sites, you can link to any subsite, you can link to pages on the site, you can even link to very specific sites like a search list. So let me show this. I have added a link to a site, and this is, again, you know, oh yeah, this is my Office 365 SharePoint. I just linked to the home page of one of my project sites here. And this is a more specific link. Look at, this is the URL, and this is a link to a specific site or page on this server. So I'm talking about how to get the right link into your map in a second. I just want to show it to you. This is interesting. So each SharePoint site actually has a search functionality. I can do very specific searches, and the result is always represented on a specific SharePoint site, and you can link to the site. So here I have linked to the result page to the SharePoint server site where I initiated a search for the word, for the string project. So this is the search result site, and the good thing is this is dynamic. So if I click this link in a week from now, and in the meantime I have added more content that contains my search term anywhere in those files, I see more or less content in here, because the whole action, look for this term in this specific environment, is coded into the URL. This is why those URLs are pretty complicated if you look at them, because I mean they are dynamically doing the action. This makes you very flexible. Another example is you link to a list on your server, like here, link to a list view. Okay, so here I have linked to a customer or contact list in my SharePoint. And now, so not so special here, but I mean this list actually has a couple of pre or saved views. This is a large list, and this list now had a view only show me customers from the UK. So a different view that was created in SharePoint for this list. Now I'm looking at a subset of my list, and it's very simple now. I've actually looked for the right content, and now I'm linking it back into MindManager. How you actually link back to MindManager depends on the SharePoint version you're working with, the browser version you're working with, etc., etc. But what always works is actually use the URL from the address bar as a link, and this is why I've opened the site in MindManager's internal browser, more convenient than copying this. Let me do this for a second. I copy it, I say a link to a list view, I create a topic manually, say UK, and copy the link. I open the add link dialog and copy this link. This is one way to do this. Another way would be, actually, let me delete this, create a topic, and since I have the link in the clipboard, right click and say paste link, paste link. Same thing, I've added the link to what I'm seeing in SharePoint, and even more convenient is, since I'm in the internal browser, I simply use this button. This adds automatically a topic that contains the link from the address bar to my map. So I go here, click this link, see it's quicker, and I've already a named topic containing the right link. Let's create another link saying I want to see the customers from Germany. Do the same, click this one, and now I have from here, I see the full list, the unfiltered list with the link. Here I see the UK list. Takes a little while, but you see it works nicely, and you see the German customers. This means that, I mean, you only search for your content that you need for the project you're working with once. Once you have it in SharePoint, link it back. Next time you simply need to click the link, and you reach the specific content. And even this has a one higher level. Let's go back to the German list here, and I see I don't need all these names. I'm using SharePoint to actually filter this list more specifically. I'm looking for specific cities here. So I click on cities, I filter by city and click and see I only want to see names from Köln and Munich and Berlin. Like this, I say apply. Now I've created another view, and all I need to do is save this back into my map. Go in here and again go in here and say add to map. Now it says Germany, but that's not right. This is cities, German cities, Munich or something. So let's see. This link should give me the unfiltered view as before, and this link should only give me the 3 cities that I have chosen. Yeah, here you go. See, again, you know, you can be very specific. If you know your way around in SharePoint, navigate, set up the view that you need, and then link it back into MindManager. The good thing is then your colleagues do not even know how to actually apply a filter in SharePoint, not even where this specific list sits on SharePoint. If they have the map, they simply click the link and have all they need. So this is the great thing about working with maps in SharePoint. One thing here, I mean, you can be more specific, even be more specific and link to list items. I mean, link to a specific name of my list, for example. Always the same thing. Navigate to the content, get the link back. No problem. This also works nicely with documents. So this is a link to a Excel spreadsheet in my online SharePoint. Since my online SharePoint is set up to use the Microsoft web application to show Excel, this opens nicely in the browser and show me Excel and so on and so forth. So that's the way to get links into the map. Let me have a quick note to how, apart from using this button, you get your links. And this is a bit tricky. It's easy for lists and views. Simply use this URL and put it in. It's a bit more tricky with links to documents, especially if you're working in online SharePoint in the so-called modern view. So let's close this one, how to add a link. That's a short summary. So a link to a site, to a list, to a view, to a filtered session, copy paste the URL from the browser address bar or drag and drop the URL from the address browser bar. This also works nicely. I think I haven't shown this one. Independently of the internal or external browser. Oh, sorry, I should have actually opened it externally to show it to you. Right click, open link outside. So here is my location in MindManager. Now I want to link this location, this back into my map. I can always use this one and drag the little icon into my map here, and I would have added a link. Actually, drag and drop works nicely in on-premise SharePoints, also in online SharePoints, with everything from the navigational part. So you can drag and easily drag links from the quick link navigation here, or from the topmost link navigation here. A link to my list stage 1 can simply be dragged into the map. A link to my test task can simply be dragged into the map. More complicated it gets if you go into a library. And now, sometimes actually, depending on the SharePoint version you're working, you can actually try to drag and drop a link in here. This looks weird. Drag should not be the right name. So since this is an online SharePoint, this has not really worked. Even though the link seems to be okay, drag and drop is not fully supported in my Office 365 SharePoint, and this is why I actually have enter this. What are you doing if you want to link to documents? So in classic copy and paste, the URL always works. And in classic view, there's another way to get the link. So I have linked here. Let me use this open link outside of MindManager. This opens my library in classic view. If I need this link to this file here, over here, or this map, regardless, I click on the SharePoint 3-dot menu over here and get the link out of here. I'm working in classic mode, so this link works. I copy it. I cannot drag it into the map now. If I have it in the clipboard, in order to link it back, I need to actually manually create a topic and add the link. So probably easier to try the internal browser first. In modern view, it gets even a bit more complicated. Let me open this link to this list in modern view. In modern view, you don't have the 3-dot menu. So Microsoft has actually added another way of getting a link to a specific content, and you find it in here. So if I click in here, I get an option to copy a link. And now be careful. Copying a link actually opens another dialog, and you can say who is the target audience for this link, and you can be very precisely, this link can work for only people who have already the right to go to this list, or this link can work for everyone who can access your SharePoint regardless whether they are members of this site or not. This works in SharePoint Online, and this means if you're using this, it actually adds more parameters to the link, which is fine. So you can link to a Word document from in your map, and even someone who is working on your map who does not have access to the list can access the document through this way of adding a link. But, and again, be careful using this for linking to maps, because if I'm using this to link to a map, SharePoint adds specific parameters, and the SharePoint file manager, the MindManager file manager, not always copes correctly with these parameters in the link. So I would always recommend, actually, if you want to link to maps, to add the SharePoint query, the SharePoint linker that automatically pulls in all the links into the map. And so for anything but maps, you can use whatever way is best for you or most convenient to get the link in, but please don't use the copy link or neither the share functionality in MindManager to get a link to a map, because this is confusing the MindManager file explorer. Okay, I guess this is it pretty much to working with links. The point here is really with SharePoint you can be so precisely to link to exactly the content you need for your project. So please make use of this and then share your nice map with your team. Not everyone needs to spend the same work. You create a nice navigation, a nice project overview, share the map to the rest of the team. Your colleagues simply need to click the link. One last remark before I come to the SharePoint Linker functionality is linked maps. So since you're all working with MindManager, you probably have used hyperlinks as well, not only to link to external content, but link from one map to another map. And you're probably familiar with the relative link concept in MindManager, meaning that a link is normally not stored as a full path in MindManager, but as a relative link from the location where you are. This is very helpful if you have a bunch of linked maps all sitting in one folder, you can move the folder from one network location to another one and the links still work. And this is still true with SharePoint, and this is why I'm mentioning it here. So if you have a couple of maps linked to each other from one folder and upload this folder or your maps into SharePoint, you do not need to redo your links, repair your links. All the links work the same relatively. And I don't think I need to show this here. Simply try it out. So the linked original files should be in the same folder, and then if you upload them into the same library, the links still work, even though internally it's absolute links in SharePoint, but this is mapped dynamically, so you don't need to repair your links or whatsoever. Very convenient. Okay, so far to working with hyperlinks, and now let's talk about the most interesting sections of our SharePoint integration, this so-called SharePoint Linker or SharePoint queries. So the feature behind this is on the advanced menu in the dashboard section. So this is, let me talk about what is a query or why a query. A query lets you or helps you to basically automatically retrieve content in SharePoint and links it back to your map. It is pretty much, I mentioned it before, it works the way like Outlook Linker works, or works the way like MindManager File Explorer works. So there is a list in SharePoint where with documents you want to link to all those documents. Simply add the MindManager File Explorer, the list query pointing to this list, and you, as a result, you get all the content as topics in the map. The nice thing is with such queries, you cannot only access one list at a time, but several lists in one query. Look in document library A from site A and document library B from site B in one query and get me all the content in one MindManager list. And I mean, the queries itself are dynamic, meaning you add the query once, next time you don't need to recreate it, but you simply refresh it. Do the same thing again and bring in everything that has been added in the meantime. And even better, I mean, while MindManager is doing the query, it not only brings you a topic with the link to like your file, but it automatically adds properties to the topic, MindManager properties, that get all the content from the list columns in SharePoint. We'll see this in a minute. And this is very important because now we can make use of the properties to be very specific about the content we have in the map. We can apply filters by properties. We can apply conditional formatting by properties, highlight every map, every topic in the map that has a property modified today by me or something like this. And again, you know, this needs to be done once and then it simply needs to be refreshed. And this is very powerful. So, example here. Let me open a map. As you can see, this map is coming from SharePoint. So it takes a little while. And here we go. So my example is a little project map, project status map or project dashboard map. It comes from SharePoint, so it's read-only. Let me check it out so that I can edit it. And now let's look at the document section over here. What you see here is a SharePoint Linker map part saying connect to the document library on the site where this map comes from and retrieve everything that's in there. And this is the result. So these are all the documents from the library. I can see which library this is by the little tag that has been added to my topic. the library is called Documents on the site EN. That's my demo site right here. So these are links to maps, these are links to PowerPoints, to Excel and Word documents. The nice thing to the other way to add link, the manual ways that I've shown before, is that MindManager adds a nice little icon that shows me the file type. MindManager adds the location of the list, and if you simply click on this little triangle here, MindManager gives you more information. So these are the other list properties coming from SharePoint. So I not only see this is a map, but this is a map that, according to SharePoint, has been modified by myself on this and this date, which has an extra column in SharePoint with something like a project stage, a project phase assigned to it. It shows me the versioning number. The content of these properties is actually determined by the list here. And this is the SharePoint library list. So if we go into our SharePoint, into the document library, this is what MindManager shows me here. The actual name as a topic, and then, you know, modified by the date it was modified, and over here you see this extra columns, and everything that has been added to the list or will be added in the future automatically comes into this query. And now the good thing actually would be that I could apply a filter on it. So this is my full document library with folders and subfolders in here, so all the documents. If I would like to see only the documents that have been modified today or something, I could use MindManager to be more specific, apply a filter, because as I said, I can, with MindManager 18, use properties as filter criteria. This doesn't work with MindManager 17, only with MindManager 18. If I want to be very specific, I could do a quick filter on any of these properties by right-clicking and go to quick filter, but then I cannot define a range. I can only say show topics with this property name and value, everything with being edited by Rainer Oberser. But I want to be more specific, and therefore I go, for example, to Power Filter. So I open the Power Filter. It's on my taskbar. I've edited it. Go to Power Filter and create a new filter query. I say I want to filter by properties. I select the properties. All these properties in this map were automatically created by adding the SharePoint query. So this is all SharePoint properties. So I look for modified by, modified at, and I say modified, for example, today. I only want to see content topics that in the modified property have today's value, and then I say show. And as you can see now in this map, only these, the highlighted ones, are the ones that have been modified, edited by whoever on the SharePoint today. The rest is grayed out. I mean, this is a regular filter setting. Instead of graying the other content out, you could totally hide it as well. One of the new features in MindManager 18 that not only lets you hide non-matching topics, but fade them out. So this is one option. You could do so. Another one would be apply conditional formatting. So look for everything that has a value like stage NA or stage, what do we have here? Stage 1 or 2 or something in here, and make it green or blue or black, for example, would be another example. I think we don't need to do this here. Let's quickly go to another list over here. Let's go to a task list. Same principle. So everything I showed you up to now does not only work for document lists, but for a task list as well. Here I've added actually two queries. query to one list called stage 1, another query to another list called stage 2. Actually, if we go back to our SharePoint again, see these are the two lists that I've queried. Tasks in list called stage 1, task in list called stage 2. Now I have called two SharePoint Linker topics for each list. I could have instead created one query, querying both lists in one go, but just for the sake of better readability, I've done it in two. And again, I'm not only getting the list entry, in this case the task, but all the other columns of this task again, and even more information. What's the status of this task? What's the priority of this task? Who is the responsible person for this task? So task lists are specifically interesting because some of the SharePoint content is directly translated in MindManager task information and therefore very easy to see, to recognize, and to actually, it's editable and written back only for task lists. But in this case, I wanted to show you something else. Now we have brought in, by the way, I mean, this looks a bit overwhelming with all the informations for coming from SharePoint. So if I select all those topics, I'm selecting the parent topic, press Shift F3 as one way to multiply select, and now I collapse the properties. I'm having a more condensed view of this. Then I simply open those properties. So have a look, we actually have a cost property defined in SharePoint for a specific task, and my example now is that I can, in this case, I don't want to do a filter, or I don't want to do conditional formatting. I want to do a calculation with this cost, and this map already contains this. In the budget section, I actually have added formulas saying sum all costs for all, as you can see, some costs of the topic stage 1, all the descendant topics, and give me the value. And this is, so all the costs for stage 1 tasks are 16,000 and for stage 2, 27,000. And here I have applied conditional formatting. This is why this is so red, and I see my budget is totally exceeded. And I have a feeling something is wrong here. So what I want to show you is that you can use MindManager to do your analysis with content on SharePoint. The actual content is still stored in your SharePoint lists, but you retrieve it in your map, and then you can do analysis. You say some cost must be off and there must be a mistake here. So because I'm in no way we have exceeded our cost by 150%. So again, I'm applying a filtering for costs exceeding a certain value. I do this. I've actually created this filter with Power Filter before the webinar and saved it as a saved Power Filter. Look for the cost property and show me any topic with a cost property exceeding 5,000, and I do so. And again, you know, I only have 2 or 3 topics with costs, and therefore I can very easily identify the problem. This looks okay, but here training and documentation 15,000. Wow, I see problem must be here. This is supposed to be 1,500 instead of 15,000. I need to correct this. Again, I cannot correct it in here, but I can easily correct it by simply clicking the link that comes with the topic. That brings me right into SharePoint. Over here, I say edit the item. So it's almost as if I worked in MindManager directly, and I can edit the cost, correct it from 15,000 to 1,500. Save it back. Now, since I'm doing the work, the editing, the save in MindManager's built-in browser, the resync of all those linker topics happens automatically. If I would have done my corrections in the external browser, I would need to trigger a resync, refresh all the topics and look if something has changed. So let me close this. Training and documentation should now contain the, I'm not done yet. It's still resyncing for some reason. Takes a while. Let me do a manual resync and see now 15,000. So obviously this does not seem to have worked. I don't know why. This is like the typical demo thing. Open link. Let me do it outside. Let's try it again. Say edit item, show more, and 15,000. Oh, so something went wrong with my save. 1,500 over here, or 15, whatever, and save it back. Okay, now I've definitely corrected it. I have 1,500, not 15,000 anymore over here. Go back into my map, and now I actually need to tell MindManager, look if anything has changed, and this is the refresh button that can be triggered individually, topic by clicking on the SharePoint icon and do the refresh, or easier, go on the advanced menu into the SharePoint section and say refresh selected or refresh all SharePoint items in the map. I do it manually over here, correcting the cost value. Now it worked. See, we have the correct value, and again, and this is my point here. Now my total budget is a little bit above 100%, and this is why the color here has changed. The color change was simply done by against advanced menu conditional formatting. I have a rule for, my budget percentage. My point is I wanted to show you that since I have all those nice numbers and other properties in the map coming from SharePoint, I can use MindManager to do nice calculations, nice dynamical formatting. Everything helps me to identify important items, issues, contents in SharePoint. So I don't need to do this in SharePoint. Of course, I could do specific highlighting according to specific content in SharePoint as well, but I need to know how to do this, or I need to go back to like a SharePoint admin or a SharePoint designer and let this do. This normally only happens if this is a very common requirement, but more often than not, you do your specific analysis with your content on SharePoint, and this is where MindManager actually comes in, because MindManager allows you with the SharePoint Linker to simply retrieve the content into a map and then use MindManager to do your on-the-fly ad hoc analysis, triggering, filtering, formatting, etc. Almost sometimes I like to say like SharePoint Designer Lite. You have the content, or you have a representation of the content, and you look at it and you set it up to look at it in the way you need. And that's the power behind SharePoint Linker, actually. So let's go back. I think you got the message, query lists. Here's a little overview how those queries work, actually. If I want to create a query, first I need to enter, again, the SharePoint site address, exactly pretty much the same what we did in SharePoint Places in our first section. Unfortunately, I need to enter the site again, even if I had it already entered 2 places. And then as soon as I've entered the site, I select the type of list, the specific list, and eventually a view of the list and filter criteria. Let's do this quickly on the document section here. So I go into the advanced menu, SharePoint, say add a query or topic. Now, in my case, I've already entered my SharePoint path. This is why I can select them. If I had not done this before, I need to again copy and paste the URL of the SharePoint site path into here. As soon as I've done it, and MindManager accepts it, I can select it in here. Again, please, if you do so, remove all the SharePoint specific stuff to make it easier to read and simply use the path portion. Now I want to connect to my SharePoint Online. I want to look into document libraries. I want to look into one specific document library, this one. And if I want to, I can be even more specific. I want not use the all document view. I want to use a predefined view. For example, I've created a view that only shows me all the content in SharePoint with a value of stage 1 in the stage field. And then I do this. I click define a filter. That's another option. Within MindManager, I could actually define filter criteria. With the given options you see in this dialog, they are a bit restricted. But the good thing is, since you can actually access predefined views from SharePoint, there is no need to apply any filter settings in here, because creating a SharePoint view gives you so many options to filter out, sort, even calculate specific content of your list, that this is very powerful. So if you need to be very specific in what you need to have in your map, create a view in SharePoint and use this view for SharePoint Linker. So I don't enter anything else here. Click on Finish. And I'm adding again my topic, and as we can see now, all the matches, all the documents from this library have the stage 1 property applied to this. So that's the order of things that need to be done in order to add a query into your SharePoint. As soon as you have the query, you can refresh it, as we said, by simply clicking the SharePoint icon, right-click and refresh it. Then the whole query will be redone. So I delete it and I go here, press F5 or press refresh, and then the query is done. Another important issue, not only the query topic itself is synced to SharePoint, but each individual topic has still a connection to SharePoint and can be refreshed. And we've seen the reason for this, because I mean, the properties coming from SharePoint could change next time you open the map, and if you want to be sure that this is still the correct values, you can simply do a refresh or refresh all the topics via the SharePoint menu. Okay, so this is a list of all the supported lists that can be used for SharePoint queries. Interesting to mention is the custom list. Custom lists are either lists that get created from scratch. You start with an empty list, add all the columns, or more often a custom list is the result of an imported Excel spreadsheet into SharePoint. So this would be found under the custom list section. Again, if we go into SharePoint, say add a query, I go to my SharePoint and select custom list, I would find the list that I've shown before, my contact name list over here. And again, I could either, let's go to the views. See, here you see the predefined views, Germany and UK. If I use UK and click on Finish, I would see all the names for UK. Pretty much what I would see as what we've done before when I linked to this view in SharePoint. The difference is that I have the matches as topic in the map, which allows me now to add content to it. For example, now I need to start specific actions around one of those names. So I simply create a task topic, task 1 and task 2 and task 3, and so on and so forth. So, because if I would use a regular hyperlink, I'm simply seeing the content but cannot add to the content. Here with SharePoint Linker topics, I just have this as a representation of the content, and I can do whatever I want, or say, these two names are related to each other. Use all the visualization techniques I have in MindManager at hand to make it more clear for myself and my audience what is this content all about. And since I'm already over time, very quickly, we've already seen it, I have extra highlighted the task list because the task list is very specific, since the task list not only allows me to retrieve the tasks, but edit the tasks in MindManager and directly sync it back. This is one big advantage, view and edit tasks in MindManager. You've seen the map already, so these are SharePoint tasks coming from a list, and I can in MindManager say, oh, this task is done, therefore it's priority 3, etc., etc. And every edit I do is immediately synced back into SharePoint. So doing my edits in MindManager does not even need me to click the refresh button. It automatically gets synced back into the SharePoint list. On the other way around, if I open the entry in SharePoint by clicking the hyperlink and edit it in SharePoint, I need to refresh it in the map unless I do it in the internal browser. So had I edited this in SharePoint, I simply next time go and say refresh, make sure it is there. So this actually syncing back into SharePoint only works with task lists, with all the task information. And with task lists, I can do even more. I can actually create entries and send them to an otherwise empty list in SharePoint. So I can start to do my task planning in MindManager, plan it out, map it out, and send the result into a SharePoint task list, and then work from here on. Little example very quickly. So this is a work breakdown structure created in MindManager. I'm creating tasks with here by going on the task menu, add task information. I'm actually using the task roll-up and then use the Gantt feature in MindManager to simply and quickly plan my tasks like here. Okay, go back to map. Now I would like to send those tasks into a SharePoint task list. It's very easy. I go to the parent task, go again on the advanced menu, SharePoint, and say send items to SharePoint. Here you're familiar. I need to select which SharePoint. Again, my online SharePoint. And then select, be very specific, which list on the SharePoint. The list has to exist already. MindManager cannot create its own list. It needs to exist. I select the topics and the subtopics and send it into SharePoint. And this is really great because you can start in MindManager doing all your analysis and planning, and as a result you have it in SharePoint and can thus actually make it available to like colleagues who do not have access to your map, for example. Use SharePoint as the platform to allow people to actually update the status, the work, and everything else. Because everything that's done in SharePoint is synced back into the map as soon as you click the refresh button or as soon as you open the map. This brings me to the very last thing, to the MindManager options in here, because here in MindManager options we have an extra SharePoint tab that allows you to actually set the syncing parameters in here. So let's go into File, Options, and here in the SharePoint section, and here you could say I want to automatically refresh everything that is linked, every SharePoint linker topic in my map on map open, for example. Or if I'm working in a highly dynamic environment, I want to actually enable a periodic refresh. It is refreshed every 5 minutes while I'm working on this map, or as I prefer, do it manually. Be careful with a refresh on map open. If you have plenty of synced and linked topics into SharePoint, map open itself can take a while because then the refresh is happening. And one last thing, in this SharePoint section you have an option to actually edit the sites you have entered, renaming them, give them a better name. Again, you know, those sites need to be added on top, even if the same sites have been added to places before. These two sections are independent. Okay, that's it so far. This is what I wanted to cover. I think this covers most of the interaction between MindManager and SharePoint from a MindManager point of view. I hope this helped you a lot to see the possibilities and the power behind the combination of these tools. Even simple hyperlinks combined in a nicely prepared, structured, and visualized map can be very powerful. And on top of this, with SharePoint Linker topics, you can make your maps dynamic, change color of topics, calculate values coming from SharePoint, all with the click of one button. Yeah, I hope you see the value. If you have not already done it, try it out with your SharePoint, and please don't forget to join me for the webinar in August, where we talk about the MindManager Server app for SharePoint, which is independent of what we have looked now. This is an add-in, a solution for SharePoint that makes it easier for SharePoint to recognize maps as maps and allows to view those maps within SharePoint in the browser without the need of opening them in MindManager. So thank you very much, and hope to see you in August again. Have fun playing around and testing it. Thank you and goodbye.
Customer, you know it would be great. The quarter's coming to a close, so please don't hesitate. Place your order right away.